Hello and welcome to Community Thinkers, a broadcast series from the Summit Hill Association. Thanks for joining us. In this series, we hear from one of St. Paul's most thoughtful people about issues that matter to our neighbors here in Summit Hill and to St. Paul. I'm Sherry Johnson. I'm a process guide, inclusion trainer, and complexity coach. I'm also a board member here at Summit Hill. And today, because Monica's out of town, we get Peter. Welcome, Peter.
Hey, hi, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. I'm Peter Rhodes. I'm serving as the board president at Summit Hill Association. Been serving for 7 years now. And it's been a real treat and an honor, and I'm super excited for this morning's conversation. We're hosting this series to engage our community as we renew our neighborhood plan. And we're finding that the more we learn about planning, sustainability, racial equity, and economic development, the more we realize how much more there is to learn.
Yes. So this show is for you. So after we get things started with our guest, we'll turn to the chat where we'll share your questions with our very special guest today. But before we learn from today's community thinker, we invite you to comment and ask questions in the thread anytime. We'd love to know what brought you here today.
Yeah, and the community thinker we've asked to join us today is our very own St. Paul City Councilmember Rebecca Noecker, our representative from Ward 2. We'll talk today about small business startups and expansions as we come out of this pandemic, as well as other topics that arise as we chat. So a very warm and gracious welcome to Councilmember Noecker.
I'm getting the button. Here we go. It'll happen. Serving double duty.
I'm here.
Oh, there.
That was amazing. It was like teleportation. I just arrived. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. So I think we can jump into some questions if that's okay with you.
It's great.
Great. So we've got a list here. I think the first thing we'd like to chat about is the pandemic and how this has changed us. So since the pandemic had us missing all kinds of St. Paul activities, what are you most excited to do in Ward 2 this summer?
Oof. Oh, there's so much. I have to admit, I am a bit of a nerd. I love working, and so I'm very excited to get back to in-person meetings. It's not the same as as we all know, just trying to get work done, get policies, decisions made without being face-to-face with colleagues and constituents. So I can't wait to get back to having in-person meetings. And just so your viewers know, the council is going to be back in City Hall, in the courthouse, in our council chambers after Labor Day for in-person meetings. But I've been coming into work in a mostly empty building for a lot of the last year and a half. So I'm excited to start seeing my friends again. And I'm also excited to get back to in-person community coffees. I'm going to have my first one on Thursday from 8:30 to 9:30 at Keg and Case Market outside. So that's the first time in about a year and a half. So I hope people can join me there. And then event-wise, there's just so much going on. I can't wait to go back to Mears Park for the live music. I think Thursday night they're kicking off Lower Town Sound. So everything. I'm excited about everything.
Oh, that's so true. I just think, I've talked about it, this Zoom ability has been just profoundly productive and powerful for us as a tool and for tasks, but there's something non-human about it, and I can't wait to be able to see us in person. I know at SHA, we've had a couple opportunities now since it's warmed up to meet in some backyards and even touch a shoulder and be like, you're a human being. I know it.
Right. I feel like it's like seeing a celebrity. It's like, I've only seen you on a screen and now I see you in person, even people who I already knew. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, great. As you know, we're building our neighborhood plan right now, and to shift topics here a little bit. And Grand Avenue has been central in many of our discussions about the future. The pandemic has only increased our concern for supporting our small business community. What do you see as some important ways that district councils and the city council can step in to support our businesses right now?
Sure. So first of all, I probably should have started with this, but I'm very impressed with the work that the Summit Hill Association has been doing on both the small area plan and just in terms of broadening the ways that you engage people in general. I think this is such a great idea, using this online platform. And
well, we stole it from you, Councilmember.
Well, I wasn't going to say that, no, but I think you and SHA and I are the only ones using it in the whole city, and it's a great platform. So I really, really applaud you for all the different ways that you're engaging with the neighborhood and trying to get more voices involved. And I guess I would say there's a couple of things. First, I just am encouraging everyone, get vaccinated if you haven't already, and get out on the street. We need you. Our sidewalks need you. Our bike lanes need you. Our small businesses, our restaurants desperately and definitely need you. So there's really nothing you can do quite as powerful as just coming back out into the public sphere and patronizing our small businesses. There are efforts that you can engage in if you don't kind of know how to quite re-engage. So, the Die in St. Paul campaign that Visit St. Paul is running is a great way. You can win gift cards to restaurants every week. The Welcome Back St. Paul campaign that the Downtown Alliance is running, they're going to have over 300 different events downtown this summer for people comfortable with all different levels of outdoor, indoor, big group, small group. So lots of places to plug in, but I would encourage people to just kind of regain your patron and supporter role with our small businesses. And then the other thing I would say is just, I think the pandemic really helped us as a city certainly see that we needed to be more flexible in the ways that we work with our small businesses. So a great example was letting our restaurants that didn't have outdoor seating create new and sort of unusual areas for outdoor seating. So including using off-street parking spaces, including adjacent parks, including on-street parking spaces and sidewalks. And I think a lot of those are things that we wouldn't have necessarily been open to before, but we recognized in an emergency that they were necessary. I'm hoping that we, the city, and we, the people, can all take those ideas that we were willing to do during an emergency and maybe see if we can be open to them after the emergency, because a lot of those things that we did actually turned out to be, I've been doing a lot of reading about how cities recover from disasters and how often they come back a lot better because they learn. For example, the Great Chicago Fire and all the innovations and how, building safety was construed after that, for example. And I think one of the things we can take away from this is just that ability to be more flexible and to work more quickly, and things that we thought might, totally destroy the neighborhood actually don't. So I hope people can be open to that as well. And then finally, just very concretely, I'm thrilled about the idea of improving signage along Grand Avenue. I know that's something that SHA is going to be tackling, and I'm excited to work on that. We need things that are as concrete and simple as just good signage, and signs that are not being maintained kind of give off the wrong vibe, I think, for our neighborhood. So excited about that.
Indeed. And so, Councilmember Noecker, in our conversation leading up to this show, you did talk about your desire to support small business startups and expansions. Can you share more particularly about the startups and how, because that's obviously a kind of as we're coming out of the pandemic, becoming more important.
Right. Absolutely. So I think there are a number of different things we can do to encourage startups to consider St. Paul and existing businesses to expand here. I mean, one of those things, and I probably get a half a dozen inquiries from a different entrepreneur or small business a month, I would say. So I just got one this morning, small business owner thinking about opening a restaurant. Where could they go? There's no space here, connecting them with PED. So it's not uncommon. But I think part of what we need to do to feed that is to do a better job of telling our story in St. Paul. Sometimes I think our motto in the city is do an amazing job and make sure no one ever knows about it, because we do a lot of great work and then we don't tell our story. So I've joined, I'm on the Visit St. Paul board. I've recently joined their marketing committee, just to kind of do a better job of telling that story. And in the wake of the pandemic, I think we really have an opportunity as a city that is a city and has all the amenities of a city, the diversity, the vibrancy, the density that people love, but isn't a huge, overwhelming metropolis that people will feel maybe a little bit more skittish about in the wake of a global pandemic. I think we have an opportunity to shine. I also think as companies are looking to locate in places now that virtual work is such an option, I think they're going to need to come to exciting places in order to attract employees. So having someone drive out to a suburban office park where there's nothing around to do afterwards, when they could be in their living room on Zoom, it's going to be a much harder choice than having someone be located on Grand Avenue, for example. So I think we have an opportunity here. We just need to talk about it. So Things we can talk about include our Open for Business initiative in the city, our Full Stack initiative that's attracting tech companies and tech startups, of which we have many coming to St. Paul, including downtown and along the Midway, a restaurant resiliency project that we worked on to support restaurants during the pandemic that we plan to keep working on, and our business awards, which recognize our businesses in St. Paul every year. Those are all examples of things that I think we can use to tell our story. So that's one thing. There's also some concrete changes that I'm working on. So for example, and I think SHA has been engaged in this, right now we have a very cumbersome licensing process for many of our businesses. And I know you spend a lot of time, all of our district councils spend a lot of time coaching small business owners through that process, and often having to waive some of the very, very long waiting periods that we have, especially for outdoor seating and liquor licenses and patios. We are starting to take more of an open approach to welcoming businesses, to say that we can probably shorten that license application time. We can assume the best, and we can impose conditions if the best doesn't happen. So rather than sort of assuming that every single business is going to be a problem business, we can remove some of those outdated waiting periods and involve community, get neighborhood input, but not impose the really harsh restrictions that we have right now on waiting. And then when a business opens, if there are problems, we can always come back and impose conditions. So I'm really excited to modernize our licensing process. And we're working on that as we speak. It took a little bit of a delay during the pandemic, but we're getting back into gear here. I just saw a draft earlier this week. And then, sorry, two more things. I have a lot to say about this. I really want to make sure we continue getting resources out to small businesses. So I just saw a report, our Bridge Fund, which we put into effect during the pandemic. We served over 600 businesses with over $1 million in grants during this time. So St. Paul has been extremely responsive. This is part of telling our story. If you're listening, small business owners, we were extremely responsive during the pandemic to help support our businesses, including 25 businesses here in Summit Hill. So that's the kind of thing that I think we need to continue doing more of through our Neighborhood Star program and others. And finally, we have a once in a lifetime opportunity with the American Rescue Plan that President Biden has put forward. St. Paul is going to be getting $166 million to be spent between now and the end of 2024. That's more than we bring in our annual levy, our entire levy, just to put that in perspective. And there's immense opportunity with what we can do with that. But one of the things I feel most strongly about is that we need to upgrade our basic infrastructure, our streets, our broadband, all of those things that seem like they're not directly related perhaps to business development, but they really are. Because when you drive into a neighborhood and you feel like things are falling apart, you're not going to be encouraged to put your small business there. Our streets, we know, I hear about it at the doors, on the phones, all the time, as I drive, as I bike, are in desperate need of repair. And frankly, there's never going to be another opportunity like this one to do it in one fell swoop. So I'm talking about a massive investment from those dollars into streets and broadband underneath them that will, I think, help attract businesses to our city.
Yes, that, as you know, when we did the Grand Avenue Task Force work, we presented it to you, that was right at the top of the list. Many business owners. So thank you for that. Peter.
Yeah, that is really, really music to my ears, because I just know from so many perspectives that the potholes and I mean, it's not just a safety issue. I mean, it's like maintenance of vehicles,
Right.
How can people afford to maintain their vehicles? And from a beauty and an approachability perspective, that's key. That's huge. So, wow, that's the first I heard of that. So that's really good to hear. Thank you.
I held it off until here, so this could be breaking news on this conversation. And we have a process ahead of us, obviously, and I'm one council member of 7, but I think there's a lot of interest in the council and infrastructure. It's just been recognized that it's never the sexy thing to do, but it's critical, and we can't keep passing the buck down the road to the next generation. The problem only is going to get worse and more expensive. So it's really an opportunity right now that I think we need to seize.
Yeah, that's great. I had two things that, there was so much there. Two things came to my mind. One was the parklets thing for small businesses to make use of some of the street space. That's been, I've been serving on the Pedestrian Safety Traffic Calming Committee at SHA for a long time. And that was a dream of ours going way back. I mean, we've been talking about that, and, it's one of my favorite things. I was just visiting New England last week. I was out in Boston and Maine and visiting a lot of these small towns, and that street feel, it makes it so inviting, and it has this natural calming effect on vehicles too. I mean, people they see that, and it's a visual cue. Hey, slow down. This isn't a highway. And I love that idea. I would love to see that on Grand myself, personally. I think, and you know, it's a tricky balance between parking and using that space and calming vehicles and making that walkable approach. So I would love to hear more about what we could do there. And I think that's going to be also, it's all become part of our discussions with our comprehensive plan as well. But so that's really cool. I love to hear that. The other question I had in terms of this idea of getting these requests in for alcohol permits or these conditional use permits or trying to accelerate that. It's been a real challenge. We've taken very seriously our responsibility to engage all the neighbors on every request, and it's tricky. I've recognized, I remember when I started here thinking, why doesn't this move faster? And then as I see the logistics of actually getting people together and organizing that, I'm recognizing the challenge there. But with that said, I love the idea of like any way we can streamline, but also, I've seen it in person live with many of my neighbors. I'm thinking of Iron Ranger in particular. They wanted to expand their patio, and we engaged, and there was some significant neighbor concern about, okay, well, what's the noise? What's the light? What's this and that? And these are legitimate concerns, and we were able to address them and connect the business owner with the neighbor and try to find resolution quickly. And we did. And I think we came up with a great thing. And boy, that patio is amazing. And I think everybody's really pleased with the outcome on that. But one of the things that's come up many times with neighbors is, okay, well, if we allow it, how do we pull it back if it doesn't work? And you mentioned that you can do that. There's a process for that. But I haven't really heard or seen like, because I would love to do that. I would love to have that kind of approach, but it's kind of like one of those things. Once you green light,
Right.
It's really hard to pull back a problem scenario. If someone isn't, being a good neighbor.
I think, and that's a really good question, Peter. And I think it's a really important thing to talk about, which we don't always talk about. In fact, just recently there was an application from a business, not in the Summit Hill neighborhood, for a patio license, and neighbors raised their hands and said, well, we've been complaining about this patio, about their dumpsters, whatever it is. They don't have a patio yet. They want one, but we've been complaining about this property for years and years. And our licensed hearing officer goes into the record and finds no record of any complaints, because these have been sort of informally lodged complaints. They've been complaining to each other, or maybe they've called the police, or they called a council member, but it never got into. And this is just as much on us as it is on the public. We need to do a better job talking about this. But there's a formal way to lodge a complaint by contacting our Department of Safety and Inspections. And when a complaint is lodged, that's taken seriously, and that becomes the basis for imposing conditions once a license has been issued. So it's not at all that, a license is out there and then that's it. We can't do anything. That's our job, is to impose conditions when there are violations. And it's a fair process. We work with the business owner, obviously try to get some sort of agreement and compromise before we have to impose conditions. But that's something that I've voted on many times on the council when a business just isn't being a good neighbor. So that's definitely something we can do. And just to be clear, I mean, we're not proposing removing neighborhood input from the process entirely. I think that is a critical part of the process. But right now we have, for example, a 45-day waiting period in which you're essentially waiting to see if an objection comes in before you can do anything. I mean, 45 days for a small business owner trying to get started just to wait and see if an objection comes in is ridiculous. And what you're constantly being asked to do then is waive that 45-day notice period so that they can get their doors open. If an objection then comes in during that time, then we look at it and we might impose conditions. So it's kind of like a provisional license to open. We're just saying, given that you're constantly being asked to do that anyway, and the number of times that the vast majority of licenses that are requested get no objections and have no conditions put on them. So it's essentially like giving 45 days of nothingness. And as we all know, if you have 45 days to get anything done, to write a college paper, to do whatever it is, to get your thing together, you're going to wait until the very end of that. So instead of having 45 days, we could probably have 20 days and the same objections could easily be lodged.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been really impressed with, a lot of the public hearings we hold for zoning land use issues before it even gets to the city, we've been able to resolve a lot of that. And I think a big piece of that is, getting the neighbors face to face with the business owner. Once you have that face-to-face contact, it really makes that communication easier. And I'd like to avoid having anything go to DSI as a complaint, but I also want to make sure that we know what that is. I'd like to make sure that that's, like you said, we want to make sure we're communicating that process, and so that, if there is a problem that can't be resolved as a neighbor, that we know where to go and how to go about it. So, yeah.
And I thank you for the work that you do, because I know that there would be so much more on the city's docket if you and other district councils weren't doing that work. And I completely agree. The first step is talk to your neighbors. And that's true for everything. There are things that the city gets called on that, again, coming out of the pandemic, I hope as we all start re-engaging, we're also willing to re-engage with the people right next to us who we might have checked in on during the pandemic to make sure they're okay. It's also okay to talk to our neighbors if we're having a problem. And sometimes I think the things that come to an enforcement perspective, often 911, which is inappropriate for so many of these things, could have been resolved just with a conversation. And there are resources to help. There's the Dispute Resolution Center that works in St. Paul. Our own Ethos Restorative Justice Program that the city attorney's office runs can be used to kind of help resolve some of those disputes before it gets to anything more serious. So a lot of tools.
So Peter, do you want to ask this question?
Yeah, go ahead.
What else is on your mind right now as you serve on the council? I know that there was a long list of things you were really passionate to talk about today.
Yeah, you're like answering every question with a lot more paragraphs than we had in mind. I love this job, so there's a lot to say, and I appreciate the chance to talk about it. So I mentioned the American Rescue Plan and that 166 million. That's it's a big chunk of work that we're all going to be thinking a lot about. And so that's one thing that's definitely on my mind. One other piece of that, by the way, is the state and the school district and the county are also getting their own allotments of ARP dollars. So making sure that we're coordinating with them, not duplicating, so that ultimately we're able to take, the many hundreds of millions of dollars that will be coming to St. Paul or to communities in which St. Paul is a part, and making the best of it for our residents. So that's a big piece of the work. I have been doing work for a couple of years now on an effort to expand access to childcare in St. Paul. It's something that so many of our families, and especially our working mothers, struggle with during the pandemic. We saw this: more than 1 million more women than men left the workforce due to childcare concerns. And as we try to recover, we cannot ignore the fact that from 0 to 5 is when 90% of brain development occurs. And that is also when we are completely failing our families and our kids by leaving it entirely up to them and in their without any financial help, and up to them when they're the most busy, when they're the most strapped for time and for resources to figure out where to go. Somehow we decided that the magical age of 5 is when, as a society, we're going to make sure that we provide those resources to families. So there are a number of cities across the country that have said we're going to take matters into our own hands, and we're going to create a local fund to help support families trying to find childcare. And I've been working on that. So that's something that I'm really excited about, and I think could be a game changer in our city from an economic development perspective and an equity perspective. Public safety is top of mind for me and for many people. We just received the report from our Community First Public Safety Commission. It called for a number of things, and it's worth Googling and reading. I'm up to page 63 right here. So I'm making my way through. It has 100 and some pages and then a 300-page appendix. So I think I'm going to read the body. It's on the, so the Citizens League conducted the study, and I think I just Googled Community First Public Safety Citizens League, or Public Safety Citizens League. We'll probably get you to it. I can email you the link after this if you want to post it here.
Yes, definitely.
I will do that. But yes, so that is great reading. And one of the things they talk about is different responses to 911 calls besides uniformed police, better mental health supports, better ways of resolving neighborhood disputes, like we were just talking about, and also an Office of Neighborhood Safety, which would just be the place that would coordinate all of these different efforts to try to prevent violence before it occurs. We have been way too reactive to violence in the past, and this is more of a preventative approach. And then finally, I would say biggest issues that I'm dealing with. Homelessness continues to be a crisis in our community. Luckily, we are not seeing the scale of people living outside that we were seeing last year. But we know there are many, many people in our community without access to shelter. So not just opening additional shelter beds, but also expanding the continuum, permanent supportive housing, and then affordable housing more generally. And then finding a better approach to those who are really in extreme states of crisis in the community. I think often people will come across someone in crisis and just not know what to do, not know who to call. It might feel unsafe or uncomfortable. And police, again, are often not the right call in that situation, not because they're not able to handle it. Our police actually are amazing in those situations. They have a team called COAST, which is their mental health co-responders. So there's mental health professionals who come with police to certain types of calls. But often those calls just take more time and more bandwidth than our police are able to offer. So we're working to find a different kind of response model, similar to Cahoots, that is used in Portland, that you might have heard about, and other sort of rapid responder programs. So that's something else I'm working on quite a bit. In addition to all of the different businesses and residents that I hear from on a regular basis with individual types of concerns or questions, and that's kind of the spice of my job. It's just that every single day I open my inbox and you don't ever know what you're going to find, and never a dull moment.
And then, so I guess with all of that on your plate, what values do you weigh when you consider different votes on the city council? What's your personal process as you approach an agenda and a meeting?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. And it's one I think about a lot. And it's funny, you get elected and there isn't really a training manual for this job, or really much of an onboarding, because you're kind of as soon as you're in, the person before you is out. Although I'm lucky to have a great predecessor in Dave Thu, and I talk to him a lot, and he's a great mentor. But I try to keep in mind my ultimate goal, which is to do whatever is going to most benefit the public. And the hard part about that is that often there's not a lot of data out there on the policies that we're passing. Often we're at the very forefront of some of this legislation, or there just isn't a lot of data from other places. Because there isn't enough studying of municipal level policy, which, if there are any think tanks out there listening, we need more data on local policies, not just federal. But thinking about what's likely to benefit the public the most, and also trying to make sure that I'm hearing from as many people as possible, because I represent 44,000 people, and I know that I don't hear from most of them on any issue. And often the people who I'm hearing from on an issue, the people I hear from almost always are on many different sides of an issue. So there's almost never a sort of, I remember when I was in high school and I was interning for a state representative, and my burning question for him that I asked him was, what do you do when all of your constituents want you to do one thing, but your gut and your values tell you to do something else? And I thought that was a brilliant question. And now I realize what a dumb question that was, because if all of your constituents agreed on something, I mean, that's sort of a fantastical scenario that never happens. So I really try to hear from as many people as possible. I try to listen and not judge at the beginning, which is hard. I try to keep multiple ideas in my mind at the same time. I know some of my constituents find that extremely frustrating about me, but I find that it's the best way to respect all of the different views that I'm hearing. And then I also respect the process. So often, Summit Hill Association is going to be first at bat, and I direct people to Summit Hill Association to weigh in, because that's the first point of contact. That's the first advisory decision that's going to be made. Sometimes the next step is the Planning Commission or the Board of Zoning Appeals or the Heritage Preservation Commission. So really trying to stay out of it until the ball is in my court, and really look at what those other bodies did, and see what those committees decided, not just the boards, but the committees themselves. Sometimes that's where most of the conversation actually takes place, is at the committee level. So reading those minutes, looking at the testimony that they received. And then ultimately, I have to make the best decision that I can based on all of that. And I always try to share my thinking afterwards. So when people ask, email me one way or another, call me one way or another, often I'll thank them for the email, I'll hold on to it. And then afterwards, once I've made a decision, I'll get back and say, this is why, or I'll post on Facebook about this is why. Because I think it's really important, especially if I disagreed with someone, for them to know at least what my thinking was.
Thank you. That's really helpful to us as we start approaching some big decisions at SHA.
Yeah, I found it really interesting as a neighborhood volunteer. There's been a few moments in my time where I had a neighbor. This was before the pandemic. We were in person, and I had a neighbor right in my face screaming that I was a corporate crony, and it just took me so off guard. I was just so blown away, and I guess like some of what I've learned is that I just have to be patient, and I love that. I love that attitude of I'm going to listen without judgment, and just and listen and be there. And I think a lot of that is lost in today's world of social media. Is we love to scream our opinions and judge black and white, good and bad, whatever it is, and and it's hard not to get pulled into that. It's hard to really see somebody as another valid space human being that has an opinion and not take it personal. So yeah, I really appreciate you having that kind of value of listening, and I've seen it firsthand with you too. I remember one day you just showed up at my door. I think you were walking the neighborhood, and
I remember that too. It was hot.
yeah.
I remember that.
And I was surprised, and it was just it was a treat. I appreciate that. So here I got another question for you. So
Yeah.
if you could snap your fingers and have your wish be granted, what do you wish everyone understood about the city council?
You guys have such good questions. I'm going to borrow all of these for my City Views interviews. It actually relates to what you were just saying, Peter. I was thinking as you were talking about, being accused of being a corporate crony, how our district council boards and committees are made up of the most well-meaning people who are volunteering their time after their busy days to be involved in the hard, messy day-to-day work of neighborhood building and tackling with the hard problems, and how quickly you become the man. Like you step up to do this hard work, and then all of a sudden, you're no longer just a neighbor or someone who can listen. And I hate that that's the way it is. And I know you're not asking for sympathy, but I just want you to know that it really resonates with me. And I really all the more appreciate all the things that you and other board members and volunteers do, because it's not easy, and it's very far from being glorious. I think what I would like people to know is that you and that council members are good, caring, thoughtful people who are trying our best to figure out solutions to really complicated problems, and that representing our constituents invariably means disappointing probably half of them on any given issue. So I will often get emails saying, I hope that you will speak up for the neighborhood on this one, or I hope that you will represent the neighborhood on this one. And I'll get the same line in 2 emails that say exactly the opposite thing. And I almost wish I could kind of show those emails, to each other, because I think people know that. They know, among 44,000 people, there's going to be a variety of opinions. Even among people living in the same building, there are going to be different opinions. Sometimes even in the same household, I'll get different emails. But as you know, from living in households. But I think that's sometimes kind of gets lost. And there's sort of this, if you didn't do what I asked you to do, then you weren't representing or you weren't listening. And sometimes you're listening and you can't vote 2 different ways on everything that you're listening to. So I'm really lucky to have wonderful colleagues who are very thoughtful, good people. And we often disagree, but that's our job. If we all agreed, then 6 of us would be superfluous, right? And so I would just like people to know that.
Yeah, me too. So we have one question in chat so far. If you are watching and you have been holding some burning questions for Councilmember Noecker, please do ask them now. This is a great time to do that. The first question is from Kasim Suad. You ask, aside from licensing policies, What major objections could a startup experience?
And I love the question. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit in the chat while I'm hopefully not botching the answer to what you were asking too badly, Kasim. I think normally we hear about objections during the licensing process, although they're not necessarily to the license per se. And actually that's kind of some of the problem. So for example, we might hear, I don't want this business because it's going to increase parking or traffic congestion in the neighborhood. And the business actually has met all of our parking requirements or has found shared parking or, has done something that takes care of that. But even so, the person doesn't want any more traffic in the neighborhood, right? And that's just going to happen with the business coming in. And that's not something that we would deny a license for. So often the objections won't have to do necessarily with, I don't want this particular type of business in the neighborhood. I actually think we've done a pretty good job with our zoning code of figuring out where certain types of businesses should go. So I almost never hear sort of this particular use shouldn't be here as much as it is any use. Any use that's going to bring more traffic or more people or more parking shouldn't be here. Sometimes it's the use, but almost always it's sort of those peripheral impacts. And then again, typically what we'll hear more of is after a business is open, then we'll hear specific things to the business itself that do relate to the license. So noise is a great example. They're keeping their garage doors open while they're working on car repair. I hear it at all hours of the night. Their drive-through announcement speaker, it blares into my, their lights there. So those things again are times when we would take action using license conditions.
Yeah.
I know one we've talked about in the past about a provision for what we called nips and sips, where what we found with one challenge within the zoning code was within the definition of a restaurant, and that it can be a little vague on
Right.
okay, because that has a different level of requirement versus like a cafe.
Right.
Excuse me.
Right.
So I don't know. Can you talk a little bit about that, or would you have any?
I think that's a really good example of why it's so important for us to have a district council process and to continually be revisiting our codes because, right, I mean, the zoning code is scary in how many different uses it has and how many different classifications for each different type of use for every different type of, again, parking requirements, space requirement, those sorts of things. But we change as a society and there's always different reasons, I think, for updating and making new classifications where it's appropriate. So I thought, yeah, the nibbles and sips idea was just such a good one for Grand because I think, again, in response, you'd seen a lot of these applications coming in that didn't need 30 parking spaces because it was going to have 2 tables or something, but they did want to have tables, but they weren't a restaurant, right? And so like seating is important, but that doesn't mean you're a sit-down restaurant. I don't remember where that is at with our zoning staff. I can check on that. That's a good reminder to see where that process is at. But I think that's a great example. We need to continually update and get rid of classifications that no longer make sense because the concern about continually doing additional carve-outs is that your code over time gets so cumbersome and so complicated that nobody can navigate it. So it's very not exciting to go back into a code and figure out which classifications are no longer needed. But that's a little bit of what we're doing with this licensing work.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. The other, because back to that example, part of it is based on state guidelines too for, health and safety. So there's it's a very layered thing that I could just see if I was trying to start a restaurant right now or a coffee shop or something, I would find it challenging. It would take a lot of effort in my mind just to navigate all of that.
Yeah, we have another question in chat actually about restaurants. This is from Matt Gray. Hi, Rebecca. Can you talk in a little more detail about the Restaurant Resiliency Plan program? What are the tools and resources, and how does one find this info?
Yes, I was actually just trying to find the website while we were speaking, and I think I've got it. And so I can again send it over for posting afterwards. But it's essentially a way of supporting our restaurant operators, primarily during the pandemic. So it includes things, mostly things to help restaurants. And again, this is why I'm hoping it can be updated into post-pandemic time. Some of these same tools, one of the things we learned during the pandemic was that there are things that could have been in place prior to the pandemic that would have made lots of different types of businesses more resilient. One example of that is just access to being traditionally banked, right? We saw a lot of the federal resources that were coming in through major banks. And if you didn't already have a relationship with those banks, then they weren't there to help you do your Paycheck Protection Program application, for example. So that kind of connection that we learned about during the pandemic is something we now know we need to keep making afterwards. But for example, the Restaurant Resiliency Program's focus is on things like digital ordering and delivery and marketing. So making sure that, businesses had their menu online and had a way to order takeout or delivery online. A lot of restaurants did not. And even things like connecting them with mental health resources, just to help the proprietors kind of make it through the pandemic. And obviously those maybe not needed to the same extent afterwards, although they might still be, depending on how things go after the pandemic. We're not done yet. So those are some of the things that it involved. And again, I can send the link afterwards.
Yeah, that would be great. I have a question that's related to that. Ooh, we actually have a question. I want to make sure we get to it.
Long question. Okay.
So this one's from Denise Aldrich. With regard to the city's working project on 1 to 4 multifamily infill housing, this name isn't right, she says. Are there any programs in the city, either public or private, that provide financial incentives or low-cost loans to homeowners wishing to create or upgrade an ADU on their property? And then she talks about some other aspects of that. Would love to get your take on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. It is not something that I think we have right now, but it is something that I've heard our PED staff talking about, because Denise is absolutely right. We allowed ADUs citywide a couple of years ago, and I think we've seen maybe a dozen of them come out because it's just so difficult to finance the cost of them. So there's a report that was really useful that the Family Housing Fund put out. And again, I feel like I'm just peppering you with links, but they basically created a toolkit for ADU ownership and potential ADU ownership that I think is really useful to look at if you're a homeowner. But in terms of financial grants and incentives, I don't think we have any of those yet, but I know that's something that our housing team is looking at. Something that is connected to that is the movement to try to allow tiny homes. There's a lot of the cost of constructing homes is just the fact that that we require a home to be a certain size. And there is a movement right now called Settled, which is trying to create on religious land small communities of tiny homes that would be lived in by people who have been formerly homeless, and staff and other community members, to try to create a community where you're in a home, but it's not a $300,000 home. And I don't think that's appropriate in every part of the city on every block by any means. Obviously, there's reasons why we want for aesthetics and other reasons to have a certain way that a home looks. But ADUs and tiny homes are both examples, I think, of that kind of creativity that I want to see more of, because we're not going to be able, especially in a fully built city like St. Paul, to house all of the people that we need to see in our city in single family homes forever. So it's a really good question. I will follow up with our team on their thinking about the financing.
Peter, do you have any more questions for Councilmember Noecker?
No, I just love that question from Denise, though, because that's something I've thought about. One thing that's really important to me is where our aging population is going to live, and how do we keep them in the neighborhood,
Right.
Because I've just seen it in my close family and friends. There's just not a lot of good options, and the ones that are super expensive and not affordable. And I hate that we lose our most experienced community members because they can't afford to live and there's nowhere for them to go, and they can't maintain these big a big property. And so I love anything that could provide that, a way for us to keep them close. And I love that idea.
Or just converting to first floor living, right? I mean, because new buildings would have elevators, but I wonder how many people would just stay in their house. If some of these larger houses, we could just live on the first floor and convert the top for other people. I don't know. Idea. We're thinking about it for ourselves.
Right. No, it's a huge, I hear about it all the time from people who are looking for places to age in place, don't want to move. And you're right, Peter. I mean, we lose people sort of right at the time when, they have the time and the knowledge and the expertise to make huge contributions to our community, but they can't stay here. And I hear about it every time we consider raising the levy, people who are on fixed incomes, and we have to raise our levy because our costs continue to increase. Obviously, always trying to keep that as low as possible. But if you're on a fixed income, any increase is a huge increase. And so we do talk a lot about the first step to preventing homelessness, for example, is just to keep people who are in their homes. And there are programs, and this isn't, I know you asked me to think about a nonprofit in advance. This isn't the one, but it just came to mind while we were talking. NeighborWorks is a great program that does help especially low-income homeowners, and often seniors are low-income homeowners, just with basic repairs and modifications in there. They can do, new roofs and things like that would otherwise, some of those code compliance issues that might cause someone to have to leave or just not be able to afford it. So that's a great resource for people who just need to make some basic modifications. But the family living and shared spaces and ADUs, I think that's the wave of the future. We're going to have more people over 65 than under 30 pretty soon. So we have to get ready for it.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we could talk with you for a long time about that, but so we're going to transition now. So something we do every show is feature a nonprofit to honor our local nonprofit community. What nonprofit would you like to highlight today, Councilmember Noecker?
So you probably have figured out by now that I'm not great at limiting the information that I want to share. So I have two nonprofits in addition to the third nonprofit that I just snuck in there at the end of the last question, because I couldn't pick. So, and there's so many. I think, Ward 2, all of our wards in St. Paul are amazing, but there's so much that goes on in our ward, and we're really lucky, I think, to live in this part of St. Paul. So it's hard to limit the information. So the first one is Interfaith Action. Which is an amazing organization, used to be the Greater St. Paul Area Council of Churches, and the name has changed to Interfaith Action. They run a number of programs, but two that I wanted to highlight. One is Project Home, where different faith-based congregations provide a month of shelter for families, homeless families in St. Paul. And it's just a wonderful opportunity for your congregation potentially to get involved in that. They're always looking for more to help. And they also run a very neat volunteer program called Opportunity St. Paul, where volunteers are in a cohort of volunteers and are paired with poverty eliminating nonprofits in St. Paul. So you're not just volunteering kind of on your own out there, you're with a cohort of people reflecting on the experience at nonprofits that have been vetted by Interfaith Action. So a really neat opportunity there. And then the second one, my background is as a teacher. Kids and families are one of my top priorities on the council. So I have to mention Minnesota Reading and Math Corps. If every one of our young people had somebody working with them to make sure that they're reading by third grade and that they feel supported in math, everything would be different. So if you have a couple of extra hours on hand and can give your time to one of the kids in our community, Minnesota Reading and Math Corps could use you. So those are my two, plus the other one from before.
Cool.
1 plus 2.
Well, Councilmember, where can people stay up to date about your work? I understand you have a show of your own that Sherry says inspired ours.
Yeah, it's a show of my own. We get like 5 live viewers every time we do it. So it's very, very popular. No, I'm just kidding. I think more people hopefully watch it afterwards. It's really fun to make them. It's called City Views. Try to interview a different city staff person or city leader. We've had the mayor, the police chief, our director of emergency operations. Just yesterday, we did one on opportunities for young people this summer. So that's actually worth going back and watching because we had folks from Parks and Rec and libraries and Sprockets, our after school program network in St. Paul. So there were 9 ideas. Each of them shared their top 3 picks for kids this summer. So together there are 9 awesome ideas for your kids. I didn't know that the libraries have these take and make kits that you can bring home and do robotics and all the stuff all the materials you need are right in there. You can check them out. So I learned a lot yesterday. So
yeah, I watched your show and I was so glad that there's so many things for a teenager to do. I have a 14-year-old and it was great.
Thank you. Good. I'm so glad it was useful. Yeah. Especially this summer when kids have been so disconnected for, 16 months, it's like we want everybody to get back not fall through the cracks. So, so there is City Views, but I do a community coffee once a month, and again, restarting those in person. So, first one in a long time is this Thursday at 8:30 at Kagan Case. I also do a virtual Facebook chat once a month, which is just I'm live on Facebook, not live like this, but just there chatting, so people can ask questions. I respond in real time. It's also a good place to look back, and you can see the record of the conversation. Lots of times there's good questions and answers that are just kept there. And then, anytime folks want to reach out, I try to be really accessible. I know I work for you, so call me, email me. Now we can actually get coffee. I'm fully vaccinated, and would be happy to actually meet with people in person again. And I should mention, because my legislative aide will kill me for going through all of this without saying this, I have a website, which you can search for St. Paul, and I have a Facebook page, also Ward 2, Councilmember Noecker. You can find it by searching on Facebook. So I should probably mention those things. And I think I have a Twitter account also. So I'm 37. I'm old. I'm not, social media is hard for me. So struggle.
Well, do we have any other questions on here, Sherry, or?
I think so. I think you can take us home, Peter.
All right. Well, we've come to the end of our learning journey here at Summit Hills Community Thinkers. Share this show on Facebook and like our page to keep up with more content. Thank you again so very much, Rebecca, for joining us and sharing your work and thoughts and everything. It's very much appreciated. And thank you, Sherry, for organizing and running this. This is just a phenomenal platform. You've helped get it going for us.
You're welcome. All right, everybody. Join us Friday at noon when we'll host Lisa Christensen of Christensen & Company to learn about the basics of commercial real estate and its implications for our beloved Grant Avenue. See you soon, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.